Adam Ruben is a writer, comedian, storyteller, and molecular biologist from Wilmington, Delaware. Wilmington, Delawarean, made good. It's not just Dr. Oz, it's Adam Ruben. He's appeared on the Food Network's Food Detectives, the Science Channel's Head Rush, and NPR's All Things Considered. He's the author of Surviving Your Stupid Decision to Go to Grad School, which he will be selling in the lobby at the check-in desk after he speaks and after the show. And he writes the humor column Experimental Error in the otherwise respectable journal Science. In addition to performing stand-up comedy at clubs, colleges, and private venues across the country, he received his PhD in biology from the Johns Hopkins University in 2008, where he also taught a class called Public Perceptions of Science, and where he now teaches a course called The Stand-Up Comic in Society. His first one-man show, Please Don't Beat Me Up, Stories and Artifacts from Adolescence, was called A Pick of the Fringe at the Capitol Fringe Festival in DC this summer. He was the hit of the festival, and he appeared at the Fringe Wilmington Festival, where he drew more than I did, and my bitter no. Please welcome, he's living in Washington, DC with his wife and their daughter, Adam Ruben.
Thank you. When I was learning how to become a scientist, I had this naive assumption that whenever someone announces a scientific advancement, it's always going to be received with wonder and applause, and that when scientists say, here's what we did, people will say, thank you, wonderful scientist, you did such a wonderful job, we're so happy about this. I had my bubble burst in 2000 when I was in the lab listening to NPR. They just finished sequencing the human genome, and people were calling in, and I thought people were going to call in and say, wow. Instead they called in and said, you shouldn't have done that. Pete in St. Louis was worried about using the genome for war purposes, and I wondered, how did people so badly misunderstand what exactly happened? So I started looking at the role of public perception in science and the role that it plays. And I think the best example of this is good old Dolly the sheep that you see in the background and now in the foreground. That is Dolly and her creator, Ian Wilmot. You may remember 1996. Dolly was the first mammal clone from an adult cell. 1997, in February, it was announced to the public. And people went, well, a little bit nuts. What do you think of when you think of cloning? You think of things like this. You think of Attack of the Clones. You think of Multiplicity. You think of the clone programs from the Matrix. You think of a giant rooster for some reason. And you think of science run amok. Well, let me tell you what cloning actually is. Cloning is based on the following. This is normal human development. You start out as one cell on the left there. That is a fertilized human egg. You become 2, becomes 4. If those 2 cells happen to break apart, they each become a full person. That's where identical twins come from. And now you've got 1 trillion cells in your body with the same DNA. But if you take the DNA out of one of those cells, let's say a skin cell, a nice square skin cell, you put it into an enucleated egg, an egg with no nucleus, you can start it dividing and create a clone. So a clone is basically an identical twin born a generation later. So, pop quiz, this is what I ask my students. If you're 18 years old today and I clone you right now, how old will your clone be 1 year from today? And I will let you think about that while the slide advances. The wrongest answer is 19 years old. The wrong answer is 1 year old. The correct answer is 3 months. Why? Because if I clone you right now, that 1-cell embryo still has to gestate for 9 months inside a woman. So, that's what cloning actually is. It is not Attack of the Clones. So why couldn't you create an army of clones? Why is that impossible? Let's say I wanted 100,000 clones in my army. What's the first ingredient that I need? 100,000 women. All of them willing to donate their wombs to the project. Then I end up with 100,000 babies that I have to raise to age 18 and convince to join my army. Clones are not even exact copies. This is Cece, the first cloned cat, and Cece's genetic mother's not really the right term, let's say genetic progenitor, Rainbow. The first thing you notice, besides the fact that Cece is incredibly cute, is that they don't even look the same. They don't have the same markings. And that's because cat fur color is not just determined by genetics, but also by conditions in the womb. So as early as pre-birth, what happens to us determines who we are, not just our genetics. That's the article published by Wilmot and his colleagues announcing Dolly. They used the word clones and cloning 0 times. They called it somatic cell nuclear transfer. But here's the popular media. Here's what they did. Time magazine, Dolly doubled their badly photoshopped with lots of little sheep faces in the background as well. Der Spiegel was a bit less subtle. implying you can clone Hitler, Einstein, and I'm told that that's Claudia Schiffer. This is Cece in the media. These are some of the media images that people used to talk about Cece in 2002 when she was cloned. You got Cece in a beaker, implying she's a product of science and not of life. You've got this horrible Photoshop BBC image of some other cat. And then you've got Cece looking in the mirror, asking, should I be? Here are some of the headlines when Dolly was announced, using terms like nightmare and hello Dolly, bye-bye daddy, implying that fathers are no longer necessary. Now, here you've got an editorial by a guy named Craig Wilson in USA Today who asks, what would happen if you killed your clone? Would you be charged with murder or suicide? And you'd like to assume that people would read this and say, ha ha ha, but instead, you probably had a lot of people reading this and saying, good question. Wow, Craig, you asked the valid questions. But can you blame people? This is what people think of scientists. I Googled scientists 2 days ago. This is what comes up on the very first page. People think scientists are these obsessive, loony, white male chemists. We humans are great at forming opinions. That's something we do readily. But we are willing to form opinions about things, especially about science, without knowing what the hell we're talking about. When you think about the story of Dolly, and the next slide is going to show you Dolly's current state. That's where she now exists in a British museum. When you think about the story of Dolly, ask yourself, is it the place of the public to judge scientific accomplishments? Yes. Yes, absolutely. But when a scientific advance is announced, your first response should not be to criticize it or to praise it. Your first response should be to go and learn more about it. Thank you very much.